in, everyone, to episode 135 of the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damien, here with Matt and David. Today, we're going to go over some trades that we've had happen this week, some injury news. We had an extension take place, and then we're going to, kind of set up the trade deadline, which is a week from today. We'll kind of look around the league at what's kind of updated since we've talked last about it, and then give our mock trades, a couple mock trades per person here. Players of the week, and then we'll wrap the show up. But before we get to all that, David, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing good. I had the Washington, D.C. vacation this last week. Got to see maybe some prospective folks being moved in some of the Nationals. I'm pretty sure Logan Webb had his worst start ever in the game we went to, and maybe it might have been the Nationals' best offensive output of the season. So that was fun. But D.C. was a great trip. Back at work now, so a little disappointing, but vacation was nice. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good. I did not go on vacation last week, but I am this coming up weekend. But mine's just to the beach. So, but yeah, it's everything's going good. Been watching some baseball, keeping up with the rumors and stuff before the trade deadline begins. So that's been fun, and we'll see what happens. It's gonna be an interesting episode. How have you been, Damien?
I've been well, just hanging out, went and helped my dad work on his shop this weekend. So just, waiting for this deadline to come. It's been fun so far. We've had a lot of interesting rumors happen, and I just can't wait for a week from today when we are able to break down, upwards of 20 plus trades normally. So, but let's go ahead and jump into kind of the trades that we've already had happen over this past week, just from the last time we were recording. We've had three. Kicking it off was the Baltimore Orioles acquiring Shintaro Fujinami from the Oakland A's and sending reliever Easton Lucas to the Oakland A's.
Yeah, so Shintaro Fujinami is a guy who was signed by the A's from Japan in the offseason. He's a veteran guy. He's like 29 years old. He throws extremely hard. He throws like close to 100, and he has a really good splitter. So they brought him in at the beginning of the season. They brought him in to start, and he ended up being horrible as a starter. Then they moved him to the bullpen, which was kind of going to be his role, because he's dealt with some control problems. So they moved him to the bullpen, and he improved a little bit. He started to figure it out just a little bit, and Baltimore decided to take a flyer on a guy with really good stuff coming out of the bullpen, which that had some, for whatever reason, just didn't perform yet, and that's definitely been a thing that the Orioles have done really well the last couple of years. Look at Bautista and Cano at the back end of their bullpen right now. So they brought him in, and they gave away a prospect that had really struggled in AAA, just a relief prospect. So didn't have to give up too much, and they brought in a guy who, at worst case scenario, he's like the long reliever or kind of in the earlier part of your bullpen. And, you never know, a guy like that throws so hard and has such good stuff could end up getting better as, for you and play and being a big key contributor. So, not a great start for him in Baltimore. I think he pitched his first two games, he's given up 3 or 4 runs. So not great, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I like this deal in terms of, poaching a pitching staff that's been pretty generally underperforming, and Fujinami's got a lot of really good raw stuff. So, this is a net win for the Baltimore Orioles, but I guarantee you they're not done, right? This is a team that's jumped to first in the AL East since we last spoke, and that's a pretty big development. They're going to need to make some moves to stay there, and I think especially in the pitching department, Fujinami can kind of be a long reliever, 2-3 inning guy. He doesn't have to be that back end of the reliever, the back end of the bullpen type of reliever, just because they have Bautista, they have Cano. It's very, comfortable for the Orioles to go out into this mid-rotation or middle bullpen, long relief role, improve there. And I think they'll be kind of improving at that starting rotation spot come the rest of this deadline.
Yeah, and we've seen Baltimore have success with, relief pitchers that either have very good stuff. Yennier Cano was a guy who couldn't throw strikes before, and now he's been just fine for them. They've had a couple other guys like Danny Colomb and Brian Baker have been pretty good for them as well since going over there. So if there's a team that could potentially turn around and make Fujinami a solid reliever, it's going to be Baltimore. So let's go ahead and jump over to the Atlanta Braves and Colorado Rockies trade, and that was Atlanta acquiring Pierce Johnson for Victor Vodnak and Tanner Gordon.
Yeah, so the Braves have dealt with some pitching injuries in the bullpen especially, and they wanted to bring in a little bit of velocity and some strikeout stuff. Even when they've been healthy, they don't have a lot of high velocity guys in their bullpen. And Pierce Johnson can come in and be that, throw a really good slider. His numbers were really weird. He was pitching in Coors this year, and he had and I'll look it up again, but his home road splits were crazy. He had at home this year, he had a 603 FIP. On the road, a 231 FIP. So there's a lot of belief that Coors is a real problem there. And he's had some good years for the Padres. He's still a little bit wild, but in a little bit similar to how the how the Orioles have done with relievers. The Braves have had some luck bringing in relievers who at times have been wild as and getting them to throw strikes. So we'll see what happens there. Victor Vodnik is a guy that's kind of interesting that the Rockies got. Unfortunately, I doubt he works out because he'll go to Colorado, but he has some pretty good stuff. He throws really hard, has a good changeup. He just never really put it together for the Braves. And as a 26-year-old relief prospect with similar numbers in Double-A to what Pierce Johnson had at the big league level this year, you might want to. It's time for Pierce Johnson you would make that trade. And then Tanner Gordon's kind of a back end of the rotation prospect type guy who's kind of a sort of a prospect. So definitely an interesting trade there. We mentioned the Braves also got Yanni Chirinos and Taylor Hearn. They got him off of waivers, and then Taylor Hearn they got for cash. So a couple depth guys there. Yanni might pitch in the big leagues as like the 5 starter for a little while, but definitely a couple more guys too.
Yeah, I like Pierce Johnson, and I like this deal for Atlanta. I think that Pierce is not as bad as his his ERA specifically has been last 2 years. Came off a 5 ERA last year, sitting at 6 this year. But he's very much a projection guy, and that's why he's able to be acquired for a relief prospect and maybe a starter prospect. I mean, the Rockies they're not giving away Pierce Johnson, but they are trying to find relievers that work in the altitude. And obviously, Pierce Johnson just doesn't seem to mesh with what Colorado's doing, and they're going to struggle with this until they figure out how to get that thing climate controlled or something, because it's just it's not enough to just throw really fast or have a well-breaking slider like Pierce Johnson does. He's a guy that's kind of been renowned for his stuff, but not his command, and he still hasn't gotten a hold of the command aspect of it. So we'll see if Pierce Johnson can kind of get going with Atlanta, and I would bet that he does, because it's just what Atlanta does. If they've gone and targeted a guy like that, they have a plan for him, and I think we'll see some pretty good success for Pierce Johnson in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think it's just like what you said. They have a plan. They do this every year right at the deadline. They get a reliever or two, and they usually make them pretty good for that stretch run and then move off of them from there. I do like them claiming Yanni Chirinos. He's a guy who was pretty solid before undergoing Tommy John surgery and just really hadn't found it since he came back. But I expect that he'll be able to, be just fine there. So the last trade that we've actually had happen so far is that the Dodgers and Red Sox, LA got Kike Hernandez and $2.5 million, and Boston got reliever Nick Robertson and Justin Hagenman. So basically on this one, LA gets a utility guy that they could use for the versus lefties. He's had a really down year. Really last couple of years have been pretty bad, but getting him back to a familiar spot and only having to pay $1 million for it and giving 2 relievers away that Robertson had pitched some in the major leagues this year. The ERA is not great, but the peripherals look pretty decent. I think he has a future of being a middle reliever for sure. And then Justin Hagenman, he's a 26-year-old at AAA that really hadn't done much so far.
Yeah, this is a weird deal to me because Kike Hernandez, out of qualified hitters, has been the worst, or out of qualified position players, has been the worst position player in Major League Baseball this year. Minus 1.4 WAR. He's got a 60 WRC plus. But that being said, we know kind of Kike Hernandez has a history of being a really solid utility platoon type guy. He hits lefty. He's always hit lefties really well, and he's a great clubhouse guy too. And the Dodgers are very familiar with him, so it makes sense for the Dodgers to bring him back in my opinion. Even though he really hasn't hit lefties that well this year at all. I mean, he's hit them better than righties, but he hadn't hit anybody this year. But it's an interesting thing. The Red Sox were also playing him at short a lot early in the season, which might have thrown him off some. So we'll see. Maybe he goes back to LA and does a little bit better. I don't know if I would have given up somebody who, the Nick Robertson had really, really, really good numbers in AAA this year, and I mean I don't know that I would have given that up for Kike Hernandez, but at the same time, the Dodgers are probably in a little bit of a roster crunch too, and they really like Kike Hernandez and wanted to bring back a guy who they feel like maybe will be able to hit lefties really well. So we'll see what happens. I definitely think it was interesting though.
I mean, I was surprised to learn that Kike Hernandez was so bad this year, right? I mean, 60 WRC plus, like a 280 on base percentage. I mean, and he may be just hiding in Boston for me, but to my knowledge, I mean, last I had checked, he was still a pretty valuable player. And we talked about him coming off a down year last year, but I figured, hey, he's probably, 90 WRC plus, just doing something unimpressive. But he was legitimately bad for Boston. But I envision that the change of scenery kind of wakes him back up and gets him going. The Dodgers are a team that's kind of platooning Jason Hayward into good numbers. They've been working a lot with the platoon splits and just trying to maximize their guys. I think they'll be able to get the most out of Kike Hernandez better off than the Red Sox were, because the Red Sox needed him as an everyday player, and he just wasn't able to provide, the hitting skills that they were going to need. So, a trade that makes sense. I don't know that in no point for me are relief prospects something you hang on to, right? If you have a guy you want and you can get him for a relief prospect, go get him. I mean, I would say, looking at as a whole at this group of trades, right? The value for some very useful guys in like Enrique Hernandez, Pierce Johnson, even Fujinami, very low. You're not getting a whole lot, I think, for players off the top 10 or so in those respective positions. Like these guys are kind of the starter trades, but the market thus far, they're not overpaying for these guys. These are pretty light trades for players that I think we could see make an impact in the playoffs. And I think that's kind of something that's gone through historically when you think about like the Jock Peterson trade with the Braves and the Cubs in 2021. That happened, early July. Jock Peterson goes on to, be one of the postseason heroes for the Braves that year. So, and the Cubs DFA'd the guy they got for him by now. So it's like those trades with the lottery ticket involved, those are the low value trades here, but these are the types of players in Pierce Johnson, Kike Hernandez, Shintaro Fujinami. You could see them in October providing big value to the teams that acquired them.
Yeah, Kike has been a part of multiple stretch runs for the Dodgers, so I think they know what to expect and get there. But so let's look over at, I guess, one of the things we should have mentioned when we were talking about the Braves and Rockies.
I've got one more note on Kike real quick. Damian, you might be able to answer this. Yeah. I know that there's been a lot of talk about JD Martinez and reuniting with that hitting coach. Is that the same hitting coach that the Red Sox had when Kike had his really good year a couple years ago?
No, Vanskoyak's been with the Dodgers for a few years.
That's I just wasn't sure. I thought that was an interesting thing to look at, but it was. But
that you did say that in talking, the media doing the rounds with Dave Roberts today, they said that one of the main reasons of going and getting Kike now is that Robert Vanskoyak and the other hitting coach were looking at tape and they saw something that they thought they could fix.
Gotcha.
Very easily, and that's what they've kind of done with like Hayward, Martinez, and stuff like that too. So they're their track history with that's been pretty solid. So we'll see though. Anyways, the other thing else we should have said when we were talking about the Braves is that they signed Travis d'Arnaud to a 1-year, $8 million extension for 2024 that also has a club option for 2025. So keeping their backup catcher in the mold.
Yeah, Travis d'Arnaud has been really good for the Braves. He's got a 121 WRC plus this year as the backup slash. He started some games when Sean Murphy pulled his hamstring too, and he's also missed some time this year with a concussion. But he's been very good for the Braves for a long time. He had a 144 WRC plus in 2020, which is pretty crazy. But he, they got him for pretty cheap. He'd probably be a starting catcher for a lot of teams. And I mean, he's a great clubhouse guy. The team loves him. The other players love him. He works well with Sean Murphy too. Like he plays enough to where Sean Murphy he's good enough to give Sean Murphy a pretty good bit of time off and keep him fresh. And I think it's a no-brainer for the Braves if you can get a catcher who's put up the numbers and as productive as Travis d'Arnaud for another season for only $8 million plus you get an option on him. I mean, I think that's a fantastic deal for the Braves. So I was pleased with it.
I mean, yeah, Travis d'Arnaud clearly values being in Atlanta, and I think it's just another rash of Atlanta signing an extension on a player that probably has no business in the role, signing that extension for that money to do that role, right? I mean, he's a backup catcher, but d'Arnaud could start for 15 teams and make starter money, right? I mean, Wilson Contreras got $87 million. d'Arnaud's not getting that, but like someone would pay him $15 million probably to catch for him, right?
Yeah.
And nope, he just wants to stick around with Atlanta because he knows he can go win himself a World Series there, and he's got a good relationship with everybody. So I mean, d'Arnaud's a really good player, and the fact that he's found a home and a kind of a success in Atlanta is good for his career. But man, Atlanta's got some kind of voodoo over all these players, man. They're just like, hey, we're gonna extend you, and you're gonna like it, even though you could get more money elsewhere. You don't care, right? Nope, don't care. All right, we're gonna go win.
Yeah. It's good to keep d'Arnaud in the fold. He, like you mentioned, he's a solid catcher that if something were to happen to Sean Murphy, you have a guy who could step in there and you wouldn't miss too much of a beat with d'Arnaud behind the plate. And he's been there for a lot of their successful years as the main starting catcher. So, and then another note for the Braves is that they should be getting Max Fried back pretty soon as well, probably within the next week or two. Which would be another big addition to that starting rotation. But so let's go ahead and look over at the injury notes that we've had happen. First off, we were talking about Shane Bieber last time we talked about the trade primer. If he was going to be a potential name to get traded, we thought so. But he's now come down, I believe it's a shoulder injury. I could be wrong, though. But he was put on the 60-day IL, and so that pretty much confirms he's not going to get traded. Bieber's kind of one of those people who've had an up and down year, especially since the sticky stuff crackdown, but still could have been an effective arm for somebody, but doesn't look like that's going to happen now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for Cleveland. Bieber, it's been weird. Most guys lost spin rate with the velocity. I mean, with the sticky stuff thing. Bieber's lost velocity too, so I think it's more than just the spin rate. He has dealt with injuries before. He was still really good last year at that lower velocity. Had a 2.88 ERA in 200 innings last year, but this year, I mean, his FIP was up, his ERA was up. He's not striking guys out anymore, so he's kind of what he was expected to be as a prospect now, which is a pretty solid mid-rotation guy who doesn't walk many. But and I think he's still probably better than his numbers have been this year. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future for him. And it sucks for Cleveland because you either were going to get a pretty good haul for him at the deadline, or Cleveland's not that far out of playoff contention right now. So you probably, if you're going to compete this year, you probably needed Bieber to pitch well down the stretch for you. So definitely a bummer. And we'll see. Maybe, I know it's a 60-day IL. I don't know exactly what the injury was, so maybe he comes back by the end of the year. But we'll see. So
That's tough. And I don't know that Cleveland was going to move on from Shane Bieber though. Like, they're 4 games out in the AL Central, but there's a lot of teams at 500 right now in the AL. We don't really know what they're all going to do between Cleveland, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Mariners, the Angels, right? I mean, those teams are all within like 3 games of 500. So there's a glut at that fighting for that last wild card spot, but at the same time, Cleveland's also got the worst division in baseball that they can kind of beat up on. Losing Shane Bieber makes that a much larger climb now if they were going to get back in contention. And if they weren't going to get in contention and try to sell off Bieber while he had a little value, well, like Matt said, his numbers are way down this year. A 3.77 ERA compared to a career 3.26 ERA. A 4.14 FIP this year compared to a 3.16 FIP for his career, right? Only 1.6 wins above replacement, which is on pace for his lowest number ever, other than his injured 2021 season, and that includes his rookie year. So he's just not in a good spot right now. Is Shane Bieber? I think overall, right? He was down in value. His velocity's down. Everything just seems down for him, and hopefully he can just get back healthy, and maybe the Guardians are able to move him in the offseason if he comes back and show some flashes at the end of the year of the guy he kind of used to be. But at age 28, going into 29, I'm just not sure that's not what it was at this point.
Yeah, so let's move from one pitcher to another pitcher, and one that hasn't made his major league debut yet, but that's Andrew Painter. Was a highly touted prospect for the Phillies. We expected to see him up at some point this year. Well, it's come out that he had to undergo Tommy John surgery and also an ulnar nerve transportation surgery.
Yeah, I'm frustrated with the Phillies for how they've handled this year. It was pretty obvious that he was going to need Tommy John surgery in the spring. They said he had a torn UCL. It was shown on an MRI. And for a young guy like Andrew Painter, I feel like you have to just go ahead and get that taken care of. If it was, a 39-year-old who's probably not going to come back from it, you might, try to see if it heals on its own or do some of those like injections and whatever. But I mean, they tried that because they wanted him on their big league roster this year because they felt like they really needed another pitcher. And I mean, they put off his Tommy John surgery by 4 months, and that could cost him development time in the future. And he'll miss next year, so that following season he might not be able to start on time. So I thought that was pretty poor management by the Phillies, and of course I don't know the doctors and what goes into it exactly. So I might be wrong. They might have truly believed that they were going to be able to, that he wasn't going to need it, but the way it was sounded in the spring was that he was probably going to need it, but they were going to wait and see anyways. So I don't know. That's kind of a tough situation, but I hate it for Andrew Painter because he's really, really talented. It always sucks to see a talented guy like him get injured, and hopefully that extra thing, the ulnar nerve thing, I hope that's not an extra like problem in his recovery. I hope that's a somewhat typical thing because I've never really heard of it, but hopefully he comes back and is healthy, as soon as possible.
Yeah, this feels like the kind of the result of a guy who throws really hard and relies on that high quality fastball, but also it feels like a product of the Phillies kind of trying to game the system. That's a team that needs pitching desperately to kind of keep up in the NL East, and Andrew Painter would have been a really nice addition late in the season if you could have gotten him going. And as it stands, now he looks like someone who's out for almost all of next year. So not only will he not help you this season, but he won't help you next season either. And we've mentioned the Phillies window is right now, based on the contracts that they've signed and doled out, and they needed Andrew Painter this year. And if they couldn't have him this year, I don't know that having him next year was going to help at this point, and you just don't know what you have, right? He's 20 years old. He made it to Double-A. He was quickly becoming one of the best pitching prospects in baseball, but how quickly it can unravel for a pitcher, and that's kind of why pitching is always so volatile, and you have to cash in on it when you can, a lot of the time, because it can go to hell really quickly, and it kind of has for Andrew Painter. So hopefully he can get back right. I mean, Tommy John's not a death sentence for your career like it kind of used to be, but it is bad for guys at high velocity like Andrew Painter, and it's a big risk for them to tear it again. So we'll see if he can get back to that same level of pitcher, because I mean he wasn't walking anybody in Double A at age 19 last season. I mean he was kind of looking like a guy who could come up middle of this year and still win NL Rookie of the Year. Like he was
They were
that
talking
good.
about him making the opening day roster in spring training.
Right, and then he blew out his elbow, and that was it. And it's just, man, that's tough.
Yeah. So the next one we have is the Yankees catcher Jose Trevino is out for the year. He has to undergo wrist surgery. Tried to play through it some this year, but it just got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore. So Yankees probably looking for a catcher here at the deadline, but Jose Trevino is out for the year.
Yeah, that's a big hurt for them because he was really good last year, and I mean he hadn't had a great year this year, but their other catchers, Kyle Higashioka, who's a fine backup catcher, but you probably don't want him starting every day. And then now they have Ben Rortvedt is their other catcher. So I'm assuming they'll probably look to add some kind of like mid-tier catcher at some point that's maybe can start games, kind of like a kind of like a James McCann, Reese McGuire type. Not those guys because they're own division rivals that are contending, but that type of catcher who's could be a low end starter. And that's assuming that the Yankees buy, which I think it's probably going to happen, but it's kind of hard to tell. But definitely hurts them to not have Jose Trevino.
If I were to, I think we went over this in our kind of off-season review, but if I were to give you the 2022 Yankees and say who was the second highest player on their team in F4, you would have probably gone a bit of a ways before you got to Jose Trevino, and he was the guy. He was really good defensively for him last year. This year he was not hitting well. He had kind of gotten the bug that all the rest of the Yankees seemed to get other than Aaron Judge, which was just a complete lack of ability to take a walk there. Right? I mean, their on-base percentage kind of as a team dropped below 300 when you removed Aaron Judge from the equation. I mean, it was just team-wide a problem, but, Trevino was just bitten just as hard as anybody there. Yankees are in a really rough spot. They're going to buy because it's the Yankees, but
yeah,
they're fighting an uphill battle right now, and they're looking at a very tough mountain to climb, but they are in the exact same boat as the Red Sox, as the Guardians, as the Angels, as the Mariners. They're going to be fighting for that last wild card spot from 3 games behind it at around 500. And it's tough to sell your fans on a sell-off when you're above 500.
I don't think they're as good as a couple of those teams either.
Yeah, they've definitely not hit like it, though they did get Carlos Rodon back halfway through this first half, and that'll help.
He's been really bad since he came back. But we'll see. So
never know. So the last injury that we had happen is Jared Kelenic broke his foot after kicking a water cooler after he struck out. I believe it was last Wednesday night or something like that. But so he's going to be out for probably at least a month, if not into September. Which is he had kind of broken out this year a little bit, struggled the past couple months, but was just kind of starting to look like he had found it again. And then this happened. So, we talked earlier about the Mariners. They're kind of be in that weird spot, and they just lost one of their starting outfielders.
So dumb. Like, I don't understand. I mean, I understand players get frustrated, emotions run high, but you cannot start punching things in the dugout, kicking things in the dugout. Like, you're going to hurt yourself. I mean, we saw it a few years ago. Devin Williams broke his hand right before the playoffs by punching a wall. Like, we've seen it a million times, and I don't understand why players can't learn to not do it. I mean, a team like the Mariners that's struggling, do they need to have like boxing gloves so when you strike out, walk back into the dugout, you get boxing gloves or kick a heavy bag or something? Like, I don't understand how this keeps happening to guys, but I mean, I guess it is what it is. Emotions run high. It's an emotional game, and For Kelenic, it sucks. He was having I wouldn't call it a breakout year, but he was improved a lot over the last couple of years, and it was good to see. And it looked like he belonged finally at the big league level. So it sucks to see him because there was a world where he continued to improve this year and really kind of turned into the player we were hoping he would be. But he's going to be out a while now, so we'll see what happens. But it kind of sucks to see him get injured. I mean,
he was part of our do you buy the changes in one of our episodes early in the season, and we did, right? We bought the changes. He hasn't been nearly as good as those early swing changes suggested. I mean, remember he hit that like 490-foot home run at Wrigley Field earlier this year. That still might be the longest of the season. Maybe Shohei might have broken it last week or something, but ultimately Kelenic was on pace to have a really good year, and he was certainly not the reason the Mariners are struggling, but that team just needed more spark, and what they're getting is more deflated. This doesn't help, and they're 8.5 games behind the Rangers. That deficit's probably not surmountable at this point, and they're I think 6 games behind the Blue Jays. That deficit's going to be difficult to surmount. And this is a Mariners team that I think we all projected to go into the playoffs this year, right? I mean, they were a really good contending team. They made the playoffs last year, broke the drought, but it hasn't gone their way this year. And this is just kind of a microcosm of their season where, something simple as, kicking a water cooler, which you'd think, probably not that dangerous, results in a player, going out for a couple months. So, frustrating for sure. And that's why you have a bat, right? You just got to take the bat, hit the water cooler with it. There you go. Then no foot injuries.
That would be a way to avoid foot injury. So let's go ahead and jump up and do our, or before we get to our mock trades, let's kind of just look at the market. Since we did that primer in, was it early June or mid-June? Things have changed a little bit, obviously. We're kind of getting a clear picture of who's going to buy, who's going to sell, some of the names that are going to be out there. So let's just kind of go over that, update, like in the past month, we've seen the Cardinals kind of really commit to being a seller. So we should expect to see them trade a couple people.
Oh, no.
Right.
Not that.
We've seen a team like the Padres who they're kind of in peril, but they're kind of deciding to stick where they are, maybe sell, but they might buy at the same time. So overall, what are some stuff that we're hearing about what this deadline's possibly going to look like?
Well, I guess I can start. I think you're going to see you've still got a few teams that we don't know, like the Padres. We don't really know. I don't think we really know what the Cubs are going to do. The Mariners, yep. I don't think we know.
Nope. Don't know what the Angels are going to do.
I don't. It's hard to say with the Angels just because if they're going to refuse to trade Shohei, then they're going to not trade anybody because what are you holding on to him for if you're trading other people?
Mm-hmm.
So, they might not buy, but I guess we don't really know what they're going to do, but I don't think they're going to sell. So
it will say that Rosenthal did put out a piece just a little bit ago that said the Angels are calling around about potential players that are available.
Yeah,
they would be foolish to not figure out what the price is for those guys, right? Though, and it's not just Shohei, right? They signed Brandon Drury to a 2-year deal. He's been good. That would be a piece that would bring back some decent, prospective controlled players. The Angels are in such a good spot to perform a sell-off. They're also above 500.
Yeah.
You can make a run when you're above 500. At this point in 2021, the Braves were 51-52. And they went and won the World Series. It can happen. Now, not every team's the 2021 Braves, but you're always going to have hope when you're hovering around 500.
Yeah, I remember maybe not the 2021 Braves, but remember that Cardinals team that won 20 games in a row after being below 500 at this point in the season. So, that's one that maybe is more like what the Angels are. Because that Braves team would come off a season of winning 96 games, and they had just kind of underperformed a little bit.
Yeah. And they added big, not big
Yeah,
names, but they added guys who
added a
just
lot at the deadline.
propped them up down the
Yeah,
stretch, right?
and,
Jock
and
Peterson, Jorge Soler,
right,
Eddie Rosario.
and for that matter, they also were in a division that took 87 games to win,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that they would have made the wild card if they had not won the division. So
Mm-hmm.
the Angels, they have to make the wild card. It's going to take. They're probably going to have to win 90 games. I mean, with the way the
Yep.
AL East is, I mean, because the Rays and the Blue Jays are going to be there, and the Astros or the Rangers, whoever doesn't win that, are going to be there. Like, that's kind of the thing. So it'll be interesting. I mean, if it were me making the calls, I'd probably sell, but I mean, that's tough. So
I will say, a couple of notes from what is being said. Ohtani's holding up the bigger names to be moved.
Yeah.
And pretty much every rental, because teams don't want to, part with their assets when there might be that outside chance that Shohei Ohtani's available, right? And you have to put together a package for him. You need to include an asset you might have otherwise moved for a Jeimer Candelario or a CJ Cron or, Lucas Giolito, the guys who are already definitely available. You can't provide those assets for Ohtani if you've already traded him. So that's holding everything up right now. But until the Angels commit one way or another, we won't know anything, I think. And that may come until Tuesday afternoon, honestly, of next week. I will say that the other thing I've seen recently is that the two of the better pitchers on the market are Marcus Stroman and Eduardo Rodriguez. They both have player options, which is going to deflate their price.
Yeah.
Some. Eduardo Rodriguez is far more scary than Stroman. Stroman's is a 1-year deal for under market values, under what he got paid this year. In theory, whoever if the Cubs sell, Stroman would probably not be hampered by that very much. But a team that we'll get into him later. Eduardo Rodriguez is really scary though. That's a 3-year commitment if he opts into it. He's already been hurt once this year. The Tigers may not be able to get anything for him, and that's really scary. But it's still a good, talented pitcher that a bigger team might be able to pick up on, and maybe even a team that's really far below the luxury tax can afford the potential that Eduardo Rodriguez doesn't opt out of that contract. So those are the couple of things that I think need to be said before we get into these trades, and we'll see what happens, man. Nothing's happened so far. Only what we go over 3 trades.
Yeah.
Just kind of mentioning on the Eduardo Rodriguez thing, his contract is for $18 million per year. I guess the luxury salary number would be 15.4. So for really the type of production he gives you, it's about market value as well. Maybe even a little bit under compared if we seen Mike Clevenger get $10 million this year, and Matt Boyd get the same amount. But anyway, so let's go ahead and just jump into our mock trades. David had the first pick of a buy-in team, so who'd you go ahead and pick, and what's your trade?
I went with the Baltimore Orioles, and my mock trade was going to be for Mitch Keller from the Pirates. We got some reports that the Pirates were shopping Mitch Keller and David Bednar this week. Both of them have at least a year more of control. I think Keller has 2 more years of control. I need to check that. But he's got some massive value, does Mitch Keller, right? Even we talked about him potentially being he's free agent after 2026, or before 2026.
So 2 years.
After the conclusion of 2026. Yeah, he's got 3 years of control left after this year, does Mitch Keller. And we talked about him potentially being a Cy Young guy, right? Now, he's not been quite that far, but he made the All-Star team, right? The Orioles have the pieces in the minor leagues to go get him. The mock I made up on baseball trade values was Kobe Mayo and Judd Fabian. That was maybe a little shy. I think they could probably toss in a Kierstad if they really need to overpay to go ahead and get Mitch Keller on board. But take it this way. The Orioles have the ammo to go out and get any starting pitcher they want on the market, bar none, including the controlled ones, right? I think Mitch Keller is probably the most valuable starting pitcher that we've mentioned, given that he's under control until 2023. if there's a team out there hunting starting pitching, it's the Baltimore Orioles. So if they're going to go out and make a buy trade for a controlled asset, it's going to be for like a Mitch Keller, and they can get it done for sure. So might not be the two names I mentioned, but Baltimore to Mitch Keller. That's the one I would do.
Yeah, I mean that's an out there one. We got the Mitch Keller news. I think it was yesterday when we started hearing that. Baltimore has a ton of prospect depth that they could go get a controllable starter that has high upside, for sure. It'd be a move that we've never seen them do before, but it would be an interesting one, and I would be here for it because it's been pretty fun seeing Camden Yards rocking this year.
Oh yeah.
So Matt, what was your first one, and who'd you pick?
So my first one was the Rangers, and I think that the Rangers really need a bat and an outfield bat. They've been playing Robbie Grossman a lot in left field and center field. They've been playing a lot of Leody Taveras. So I think that if the Cubs do sell, I think that Cody Bellinger would be a really cool option for them. He's a 1-year guy. He's a rental, and I don't think you'd have to give up a ton for him because of he's a rental who he's been good he's been extremely good this year, but I think that there's still something with him. He's been injured some this year. He's had that history of battling injuries, and just the fact of the matter is that like a lot of his StatCast numbers are still not great. They're way better than they have been, and like I say, the results have been awesome, and he's gonna fetch a pretty decent return. But for 2 months of Cody Bellinger, I think they could get I don't think they could get a top 100 guy, but they could get something just beyond the top 100 maybe. So I think that's something that it would be a good fit for the Rangers, and it does sound like the Rangers are going to be really aggressive. So we'll see what happens, but I think that could be one if the Cubs do sell, which I think these next 4 or 5 days are going to determine a lot of that.
They will.
How they play, but I think that's a team that that's a guy that the Rangers might go hard after.
I will say the match is really good for the Rangers and the Cubs. I think the Rangers have some pieces the Cubs need. I think the Cubs could be incentivized to move both Bellinger or Stroman to the Rangers. I think both would be a pretty good fit. That said, Bellinger specifically, you have to move for more than a 68th, 69th overall pick in next year's draft, because if you keep Cody, you're giving him the qualifying offer, and then if he signs with another team, you're getting the pick. So it has to be more than that. And, rental bats don't always get a big prospect. The Rangers can be aggressive. They have like Justin Foscue high in the minors. It would make some sense if the Cubs do sell, but there is that caveat. And one of the things Rosenthal floated in that article Damian mentioned earlier was that the Cubs could be keeping Bellinger, trading Stroman. So, and then kind of doing what the Orioles did last year, like also buying but just trading away assets. I don't know if they're creative enough for that. So whatever. Bellinger for the Rangers is actually a really good fit.
Yeah, reunite him with Corey Seager. So the deal that I went with was the Tampa Bay Rays acquiring starting pitching. We've talked about their long history this year of starting pitching injuries. And the name I had is the name we were just talking about, Marcus Stroman. I think it would make a lot of sense for the Tampa Bay Rays to go out, get a Marcus Stroman, put him into that rotation. They have one of the better infield defenses in the league. That also will help him as mainly a ground ball pitcher. And, just for throwing it around and stuff, I was kind of looking at a guy like Jonathan Aranda as what would kind of be a trade back. He's a 25-year-old that, is kind of blocked there with the Rays not really able to get playing time a lot. But in AAA this year, he's batting .344 with a 162 WRC plus, 17 homers, 15% walk rate to 20% strikeout rate. So that's very close. And even last year in AAA, .318 with a 142 WRC plus, 18 homers. A guy that I think can be an impactful player for you. The Cubs have been looking for somebody at first or third base. This guy could probably jump right in and play that for you. And I think it's a solid match there. Stroman would help the Rays immediately, give them another top of the rotation starter to go with Glasnow, McClanahan, and it really kind of protects you if Glasnow, gets hurt going down the stretch, gives you another guy who can step in and give you some solid innings.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're partnering up with the Rays, you're going to want to find one of their first base prospects, basically, right? And they have a bunch of them. So, Aranda's probably the lowest down of the totem pole of those guys, but figuring out a way to, the Cubs could pay off the $20 million next year or something to get up to the next, tier of player. They could toss in prospects. There's definitely a deal that can be had. Aranda's an interesting player, but we'll see if he can figure it out at the major league level. He's kind of one of those guys who, you'd think if he was so good in the minors, why hasn't he come up for the Rays yet, right? They chose Luke Raley over him, and Luke Raley's been spectacular. So you never know, right? I'm ultimately good with partnering with the Rays. A lot of people say don't trade with the Rays. Rays have a really good farm system. They can go out and get whoever they want to, right? They were probably number 2 on the team I wanted to pick to make up a trade for, because I felt like they've got some really interesting pieces. They could be after some of the controlled talent as well. So, I'd keep an eye on the Rays, but Stroman to the Rays is definitely a fit for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Rays might try to go more for bullpen additions because they're their rotation. I mean, even with the injuries they have, they've got 3 really, really good ones, and they've still got like Taj Bradley and a couple other guys who are decent, maybe a little inconsistent because they're young, but I mean, with Eflin, McClanahan, and Glasnow at the top of the rotation, like that's tough to beat. But
they don't
I could see them
need a starter.
one. Yeah.
They don't need it, but they could always use it.
They could use
it. So, David, what was your next trade that you had?
Yeah, so I chose the Dodgers to make a buy trade, and I believe that it's high time for the Cardinals to sell. It's high time for the Dodgers to buy, and the one thing the Dodgers have that I had to check with Damien actually, because the luxury tax implications for the Dodgers are very funky. Trevor Bauer's salary got put back on this year, and it shot him over the luxury tax. So if they're going to take some cash on, why not take on Nolan Arenado's contract, right? I mean, the Cardinals probably aren't incentivized to move Arenado unless they get some good players in return, which would therefore break the little baseball trade values website that we like to use to at least verify whether something like this makes sense. The Cardinals, I would say, probably pay half the contract, some to that extent, but they'll get like 3 pitching prospects from the Dodgers, right? And that would make some sense to me. They could also flip Jordan Montgomery's rental in to acquire even better, pitching prospects. I figure they get like a Michael Grove or a Ryan Pepiot, and then like a Bruns and a Frasso, something to that effect, right? But if the Cardinals are selling an Arenado, they're buying pitching prospects for sure, because that's where that system just lacks so sorely right now. And they can maybe hope that Jordan Walker can play some third base, but he's been dreadful in the outfield. So at this point, maybe move Brendan Donovan there. They've got a bunch of names that can kind of play filler on the infield.
Nolan Gorman too.
Yeah, Gorman. Yeah. So I think moving Arenado at this point is more of a let's see how much we can get for him move for the Cardinals, and they need pitching, so the Dodgers do have a plethora of pitching prospects that aren't all ready yet. It seems like the Grove has struggled, Pepiot has struggled and been hurt. They need guys who can pitch now. Montgomery can at least perform well now, as maybe the 4 going into the playoffs for him, and Arenado playing third base, matching him up with Freddie Freeman, that'd be kind of dangerous. So that's my my trade.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. It allows them the ability to you can move a lot of things around. Muncy could go play second, where he was pretty solid there. Mookie could play some shortstop and some outfield. I mean, it just gives them a lot of options. Arenado's that Southern California kid. It's been rumored that he would be willing to waive his no trade clause to go back to Los Angeles. That was one of his preferred destinations when he was with the Rockies, but obviously Rockies wouldn't trade him in division. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I don't know if it happens, but it is pretty interesting. Pretty interesting deal that is a possibility.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. I don't think Arenado gets moved, but
Right.
I mean, if he were to, that would be an interesting. That would be an interesting one. And like you said, I like the point of Jordan Walker. He came up as a third baseman like his entire minor league career. He was playing third. I know that he's been horrible in the outfield this year, but this is also his first time ever playing outfield, and maybe he's just a better infielder. And I know his defense at third base wasn't supposed to be really great, but I think it's supposed to be better than he's been in the outfield. So and Nolan Gorman also came up as a third baseman too. So I
Yeah.
think that you have options there that maybe if you did move Arenado, you wouldn't fall off a cliff like maybe you would you know
Well, hold on now. Let's not
you
get
would have
crazy. They probably
otherwise.
should fall off a cliff.
Well,
Biased.
yeah,
Biased.
Well, I mean, it probably wouldn't hurt them just to go into a full-on rebuild, anyways. They
yeah,
are that system's not good, and this team is not good as
yeah.
constructed, anyways. So Matt, what was your second trade that you came up with?
So my second trade, a team that has been struggling a little bit lately, but was really good for a long time this year. They've got a lot of young talent. It's the Diamondbacks. They're in the thick of the wild card race right now, and in the National League West race. They have, they really need some pitching. They've got Zach Gallen, who is amazing. But beyond him, they've had Merrill Kelly pitch really well this year, but he's been injured some. And after that, they just don't really have that much pitching. And their farm system has a couple guys who are interesting, but they don't have anybody who's like eminently looking to be a big time starting pitcher for their in the big leagues. And with the amount of young position player talent they have and the core that they have, I think they'd like to get somebody who's a little bit more controllable. And they also still have a really good farm system, and some of the guys in their farm system are blocked a little bit too. So I said that I think that they'll go and make the trade for Dylan Cease if the White Sox do decide to move him, and also get Kenyon Middleton in the deal, as the D-backs definitely need some relief help. Kenyon Middleton's been good this year. And I think that they would move one of their top guys for that, like a Jordan Lawler type, who is really good, a really good prospect, but maybe doesn't have quite the same kind of shine that he had when he got drafted. And they've got so many good prospects right now, and I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. But I definitely think that could be a landing spot for like a Dylan Cease and reliever, or like Damian mentioned, that could be another landing spot, or David. Sorry, David's the one that had the Mitch Keller trade. That could be a spot for Mitch Keller and maybe like one of their relievers too. I don't know if they'd get Mitch Keller and Bednar, but Mitch Keller and another reliever. So definitely an interesting one to look at. But I think the D-backs will make a pretty aggressive move for some controlled starting pitching.
Yeah, we've seen the D-backs make aggressive moves in the past, especially for pitching. Not always at the deadline, but just in general.
Yeah.
That would be a big time move for them, and would cement if you could cement Cease and Gallen as part of your top two in your rotation, and then if any of those pitching prospects that they have can really turn out to be what they're expected to be, that could be a really dangerous team here. They have a lot of their stars breaking out this year. We already talked a lot about Corbin Carroll. Cartel Marte's kind of found himself again. Geraldo Perdomo's having a good season. So it's a team on the rise, and if they were to trade for a young top of the rotation arm, would be definitely what they need to kind of get back into the race.
I will say, when you put Jordan Lawler on there, he's a top 50 prospect, but that's the type of deal the White Sox would need to move Dylan Cease, right? Is a kind of a no-brainer top end prospect. They're losing Tim Anderson. Jordan Lawler's in Double-A. He can get to the majors in the next season or two. I'm ultimately on board with this deal. I don't know that the White Sox move Dylan Cease. I generally think they're going to want to wait till the offseason to try to ensure that teams can do their homework a little more and maybe pay up a little bit, see what Dylan Cease has down the stretch, because he hasn't been good this year. We say he hasn't been good, right? He has given up a lot of home runs, has been his big concern, and he's He's giving up home runs at a 10.1% clip every time a fly ball is hit. He's not giving up ground balls with a just 38% ground ball rate. He's got a 4.04 ERA. Ultimately, he's still a solid starter, but he's not the Cy Young candidate he was last year with the 2.20 ERA. So, teams aren't going to necessarily pay up for a guy who's sitting at a 4 ERA and is down a mile an hour in pitching velocity, fastball velocity. That said, Dylan Cease is a guy with a lot of talent. He throws a very strong fastball. He's got good breaking stuff, wicked curveball. He's got good command for a guy who has that kind of electric stuff. It's a guy you give up a top 50 prospect for. And the Diamondbacks have to be willing to throw around some extension money, especially if you're giving up Jordan Lawler. But I think they'd be willing to do that. The Diamondbacks haven't been afraid to spend money before. Remember Zach Greinke getting a long-term deal there a few years ago. So I like it as a deal from you, Matt.
Don't like it. Don't like it at all. So my last trade that I went with was for the Cincinnati Reds, a team that has broken out this year. They've had a ton of prospects come up and do very well for them. The one thing that they've kind of got away with, I feel like, lacking is pitching. Hunter Green went down. Graham Ashcraft has not been good. They've had some good performances from a guy like Andrew Abbott. I feel like they need to kind of shore up that rotation and maybe even that bullpen a little bit. So the trade that I had was them going to the Detroit Tigers and for a name that we mentioned earlier, Eduardo Rodriguez, and bringing back old friend Michael Lorenzen. Now, I don't know exactly what the return would be, but the Cincinnati Reds have a plethora of middle infield talent just through their system. Maybe they look at a Noelvi Marte, Edwin Arroyo, somewhere in that range. They give up one of those guys. You're not going to need them up in the major leagues when you have Matt McClain, Jonathan India, Ellie De La Cruz, Nick Senzel, Spencer Steer, Christian Encarnacion Strand. We can just continue to go with what they have there. And they really, to solidify that pitching staff, you could put Eduardo Rodriguez and Lorenzen in the rotation if you need be. And if you get some of those guys back, like Hunter Green or whatever, Lorenzen can easily fit right into that middle of the rotation or middle of the bullpen and maybe late bullpen arm with allowing that stuff to play up. He's been in Cincinnati before, so they have a relationship there. And Eduardo Rodriguez, the Reds owner, came out and said he's not afraid to add payroll and to add payroll past this year at this deadline. And I feel like Eduardo Rodriguez would just be a guy that, he's a solid starter that you can throw into there. I already mentioned his contract's not too outrageous. It's probably about market value for him, if not a little bit under, if he's given you the production that he has so far this year. I think it would be a good fit to add him to that rotation, really take a chance if you're the Reds at your young guys are there, they're performing, solidify that rotation and go make a run at this division because they've kind of fallen behind the Brewers a little bit and they need some type of move to kind of spark it again.
Yeah, that's kind of like, the Braves in 2018 went out and got Kevin Gausman at the deadline, who was before Kevin Gausman became what he is now. And just because they were overperforming and they had they went and took a guy who maybe he wasn't the most expensive player in the market, but was a stabilizing, solid pitcher in their rotation. And that's something that the Reds really need. They need just a couple stabilizers that are decent. Because right now they're getting blown up their pitching's getting blown up all the time. So, I think that's definitely something that they need, and it would be nice to see them get something.
Speaking of getting blown up with the Reds, sorry, David, to cut you off there. Did you guys see the stat with Luke Weaver?
No.
With the Reds, he has like a 7.20 ERA in his 17 games there.
Yeah.
And I think in the last 10 games, they're 9-1 in games that he started.
It's insane.
It's stupid how he's just getting absolutely demolished or something like that, and they're 9-1 in those games. It's hilarious. Sorry, David, continue.
No, you're good. I was gonna say that I tried to lead into it when I was talking about Erod earlier, right? When you've got this kind of potential for additional money to be tacked on, the Reds are the right type of team to make this move because they have a lot of space to the cap. They do not have a lot of big contracts. The Reds team is a team that has spent big in the past. They are a team that can spend money. They haven't, and their entire team right now is a bunch of guys who are under a lot of control, and then one is extended in Hunter Green. This is a team that can go out and acquire some salary. Erod, having that deal, that kind of helps them if he were to opt into the contract, right? I mean, if they could get him willing to stick around, they'd probably be willing to pay him even a little bit more than that for over the 3 years, right? I think it's like 47 or 48 million. They'd probably be willing to pay him 60 over those 3 years, but it's one of those things where the Reds have to be willing to go out there and take on salary at this point in the season, and I think they are. But their ownership has been questionable in the past. So the way this deal gets struck down comes from the ownership. It doesn't come from the front office. I'm sure the front office has explored, trades exactly like this because this is exactly the type of trade this Reds team desperately needs.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's exactly what they need. And one thing to mention too is, there's the potential that Votto's contract could be off the books after this year. They have a club option for, I believe it's like $20-something million for this next season, and who knows? I mean, they could always decline that and then have him come back at a lower salary or something. But that's still a potential $20-something million off the books if you're looking at a move like this potentially. So let's go ahead and jump over to our players of the week real quick. So, David, who do you have for your player this week?
With Matt's third baseman, Austin Riley. I think he hit 6 home runs this week. He's kind of gone on an absolute tear is what he's done. Has Austin Riley. The Braves have just been so overwhelming this season on offense. Austin Riley this week, 16 RBI, the 6 home runs, 9 runs scored. He's obviously playing better third base defense, I think, these days than anybody thought possible a few years ago. Austin Riley's got extended for $200 million, and he's still kind of under the radar in terms of, being one of the best third basemen in baseball. You start naming guys off, you're probably like Arenado, and you might get stuck, but Austin Riley's got to be up there at this point, right? He's really, really good, and he's a legitimate power hitter that was struggling a little bit to start the season, but the last couple of weeks have really brought his numbers back to what you're expecting from a guy like Austin Riley. And his season line, he's up to 116 WRC plus. His slugging's up to 488. Got to 22 homers. He's definitely going to have another one of those seasons where at the end of the year you're like, oh my goodness, how is he's in the MVP race, right? Like, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, one note on Austin Riley, his defense this year has been way better than it has been in the past. He's been a positive defender at third base. He's actually been a pretty good bit better defensively by the metrics than Nolan Arenado. So that's another thing that he's done well this year.
It's surprising to me. And
yeah.
I think I saw a game, and it was the All-Star game. He made a couple plays in the All-Star game where we all went like, who the heck was that? Oh, it's Austin Riley. What? Like, yeah, he's good down there now. I think that's pretty evident, and the metrics are backing it up.
Yep. So from one Brave to a former Brave.
Yep. My guy that I picked this week is Freddie Freeman. He had a fantastic week, hit 500 this week, 600 on base, 958 slugging, hit 3 homers. I think 2 of them came in the same game against the Rangers.
Yeah.
I saw highlights from that game. But, he's putting up another great season. And, I mean, there's not a lot to say about Freddie Freeman because he's kind of what he's always been, which is awesome. So, he continues to be great. And not a lot to say about him. So, very good week for him, though. He was probably the best hitter. Him or Riley, probably the co-players of the week. And Freeman was right up there, too, though.
He might be having the best season of his career.
It's up there.
Yeah.
If not for Ronald Acuna, he'd be hunting a second MVP.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So the guy that I went with this week was Kyle Tucker. He had a 3-homer game against the Angels this last week. hit 360, a 467 on base, 840 slugging, 251 WRC plus. Exact same strikeout to walk ratio, 16.7 percent each there. 3 stolen bases, 8 runs, 6 RBIs there. Just one of the leaders of that Houston offense. Him and Alex Bregman, who had a really good week as well, were really carrying that offense. Who's been missing Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez? Sure seems like they should be back here in the next week or so, but actually Kyle Tucker just homered again tonight, so I'm adding that on to my. He has 4 homers this week. But yeah, Kyle Tucker, he's an underrated superstar, I think, in the league. I don't think enough people talk about how good he actually is.
Yeah, he's got some of the weirdest defensive metrics this year I've ever seen. He went from being like a plus defender in right field to being like one of the worst in baseball this year. It's just been crazy. So, but to go on your point, like, you know, a lot of times this noise with defensive metrics, and if he had been putting up the same defensive metrics as he has the last couple of years, then he would be like, you know, a 4.5 win player right now. So,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. He's having a really good year.
Yeah, he's been really good. So anything else that we want to wrap up on before we end this episode and head towards the trade deadline? Like I mentioned, next week's episode we'll have all of the trades. But anything that you guys want to look forward to, you know, potential trades and stuff?
Yeah, I guess I can start. This is going to be a really interesting deadline. I don't think we're going to see the same kind of craziness we saw last year with Juan Soto getting moved, who was like a legitimate 23-year-old superstar with 2.5 years of control left. You know, even if you did see a Shohei get traded, like, it would be, you know, it's a rental. Even if he is the best player in baseball, he's a rental. So I don't think you'd get the same kind of package as that. I don't think you're going to see like I don't know if you're going to see a superstar get traded. I know we've talked some about Arenado tonight, but I just don't know if I see it. It's going to be very interesting to see which teams end up buying and which teams end up selling. And for the teams that are selling, the Cardinals and the White Sox specifically, but to a certain extent, maybe a couple of the other teams like the Mariners, how much do they sell? Do they just sell a couple of their rental pieces that like the Cardinals selling Flaherty and Hicks, and or are they going to sell, like, you know, start trading Goldschmidts or Arenados and Brandon Donovans and that type of guy? Same thing with the White Sox. Are they going to just trade Giolito and maybe two of their relievers, or are they going to start offloading Andersons and Kopechs and Dylan Cease? Like, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I think it's going to be. There's been a lot of people talking about how it's not going to be a good deadline at all. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's going to be quite the same as what we've seen the last few years, but I think it's going to be a very interesting week. I think the market's going to be, it's the biggest sellers market we've ever seen, I think, especially with the amount of, you know, playoff spots that are up for grabs right now, the amount of teams that are around 500 and in contention. So it's going to be a very, very, very interesting deadline. I'm excited to see what happens over the next week.
There's a few teams this week that can really shift the kind of the metrics on what happens on next Tuesday, right? I mean, there's several teams holding some really big pieces. You know, the Cubs are one, but the Mets have some big pieces. The Padres could throw some guys in the market that, like Josh Hader, that would suddenly kick things into high gear. You know, we mentioned the Angels, but the Mariners have some controllable pitching, and that is a strength of their system where, you know, that would mean just about anybody, right? Both sellers and buyers could be interested in the Mariners pitching if the Mariners are hunting offense. You know, there's a lot of things to still get kind of wrapped up as we go into next week. And it's funny because a lot of these teams kind of are playing for their seasonal lives here. You know, you've got several teams definitely undecided and considering both avenues. So we'll see. Maybe some teams are going to both buy and sell too. I think that's something that front offices are going to try to explore, where, you know, you trade off a couple of your more rentally pieces, but you also trade away some prospects to get some major league value. I think it's possible for a number of these teams that are right around 500 to try to play for kind of now and the future. Which ones? I don't know. It makes sense for every team to do that. So we'll see. I mean, half the league's at 500 right now. It's gonna be wild.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, Matt mentioned that we don't think it's going to be one of the crazier deadlines. I think it's still going to be one of the deadlines where more moves happen than we think.
Yeah.
Like, it might not be so many of the big names being traded. There's always surprise names that we aren't even thinking of or hearing right now that will get traded. I mean, we won't even hear about it until the trade happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're going to have one of those deadlines where a lot of deals come to fruition late in it, and that, I mean, people are always looking for bullpen arms. People are always going to look for pitching, but there just seems to be enough of those guys going around, and the rumors kind of already starting to bite. Like, who would have thought, like 2 weeks ago, that the Pirates would consider selling Mitch Keller? Like, nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's David Bednar as well. Like, we're going to continue to get these. Now, will they happen? Who knows?
Right.
But it's the type of stuff where, like, these teams are going to start floating more names out there, and I think you're going to see a lot of these deals happen. I think you're going to get upwards of 25 to 30 trades this year.
Yeah, and those can range from the Mitch Keller types, but to the types we've already seen with the Fujinami and Pierce Johnson. I mean, you'll see the relievers will move. Yeah. If nothing else, relievers will move. They always do.
Yeah. One other thing you mentioned with that, without the waiver trades these last couple of years, you absolutely have to have the players in your organization for your postseason run as of Tuesday. Like, after that, you cannot add unless there's a street free agent you want to add.
Yeah.
You cannot add anything. So basically, in the past, you might not see somebody like a Pierce Johnson get moved because the Braves might wait and do a waiver trade for somebody like that. Or you might not see a Kike Hernandez get moved yet because the Dodgers might wait, see what happens at the non-waiver deadline, see if they can pull in somebody who's, having a better season. And then, if they don't, then they can bring in the Kike Hernandez type. But now, all your moves, all your depth moves, everything has to happen before the deadline at the end of July. So, you're probably going to see a lot of those small trades too, like you mentioned, like a ton of them. And of course, we've seen this last couple years, but it'll continue this year.
Hey, I low key missed the waiver trade deadline.
Yeah,
it was nice.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really was nice. It helped when teams have injuries in August too, like.
Well, it gave those teams that are in that position of like, should we sell, should we not, an extra month of like, hey, then we can figure it out and then we make a move at that point. Like, but anyways,
I will say I do like having a strict deadline too.
Yeah.
But I think maybe what they need to start considering is pushing the deadline back a week or two into August, given that the draft is now a half a month before, like 3 weeks before the trade deadline.
Yeah. I was gonna say, or they could just move the draft back up to maybe not.
They want it
to
be during the All-Star break. I get it.
Well, maybe move the All-Star break to actually mid-season, and
that would work
like
for me.
The 5/8 mark.
I mean,
all right, we fixed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's the thing. If you want to keep doing the draft during the All-Star weekend, don't do the All-Star weekend in the middle of July when you're already, because that means by the time you get to the trade deadline, like they're like a quarter of the season left or something like that. Like, the value of what players want to go for, it's not there. If you make the deadline, July 15th or July 20th, I don't know, something like that. Like, you put it to the middle of July, you might see a little bit more action.
Right. Because there's more time left in the season. Those rentals are slightly more valuable.
Yep. Anyways, it's going to be a busy episode next week. It's probably going to be one of our longest episodes we've ever done, but hope you guys tune in for that one, and we will be here breaking down the trade deadline next week. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.